shall I say a few words to introduce you at least?
Sure, I can introduce myself if you like, but I don't mind. I mean, Christine is already knows me
maybe
well.
maybe I can say something which I found pretty impressive, that you that you also worked as a professional clinical psychologist and were very much engaged into United Nations Refugee Agency and some projects there and studies on the lives of migrant women and vulnerable persons, that you're very much interested in how to get back into reality after very traumatic experiences. And I can only guess that you might that this is one of the reasons, maybe on the motivation, that you chose your topic on gratitude and ethics. So
yes, absolutely. Yes, it was one of the main reasons I started researching gratitude a few years ago, because I think it was one of the main factors that was helping people to get back into some sort of connection with life and be able to rebuild again after all the trauma and all the losses. And this is what piqued my interest with gratitude to begin with.
So Taline, it's your turn now. You can start,
okay.
And I hope we have some time for discussion or for some questions and answers.
Okay, all right, thank you. I want to talk about gratitude and ethics today. Like I just said, my interest in gratitude started a few years ago, seeing how it helps. It seemed to be one of the factors that led people who suffered from different types of trauma get back to a connection with life, especially in terms of being able to rebuild or at least find the strength or the energy to start again, to build again, to create again. And so initially I did this research for my PhD dissertation, and my interest is more veered more towards what we now call dyadic forms of gratitude, as opposed to triadic forms of gratitude. And my talk today is a genealogical attempt at explaining why we need to review our concept of gratitude and include dyadic forms of gratitude in our understanding. And so in my approach, so my attempt is sort of a conceptual mapping of of our understanding of gratitude. And towards the end of my talk, I will propose how we can reconstruct this concept to actually reflect our experiences and our relationship with the world. So all right, so I'm going to go back to the concept. So I want to clarify that this is the concept of gratitude in the history of Western ideas. Okay, so the understanding of gratitude and relationships of gratitude is very different in other philosophies, and so this work is focused on the development of the concept in the West. Okay, so in the classical era, we see two different approaches to gratitude. So Greek philosophy doesn't give a lot of space to gratitude. Scholars have suggested that this is because this was a Mediterranean culture of reciprocity, where what mattered was the exchange of favors. So it wasn't so much a matter of feeling grateful and being grateful for a favor as much as it was a matter of returning favors. And so we can see this in Aristotle's magnanimous man, actually, and we can see that in classical Greek, there's a word for ungrateful, achariston, but and charis is usually translated as kindness, but we don't find a word that that expresses being grateful. And so this shows that the focus wasn't on how we feel; it was on what happens in an exchange of favors and benefits, and so on and so forth. And so gratitude was felt, obviously, but it was not necessarily a duty or a social obligation. And Aristotle's magnanimous man is an interesting example with this, because Aristotle says this, the megalopsychoi does not like being grateful. It is understood as a relationship of dependence from the benefactor. And so the magnanimous man does everything he can to, first of all, return the favor and return it even more than necessary, because it weakens him to be dependent on someone's benevolence. And so in Greek philosophy, we can say that the focus is on the exchange of favors and not so much on the role of gratitude, for example, in social life, which is very different from what we see later on in Roman philosophy with Cicero and Seneca. And especially Seneca, who was the most influential philosopher on gratitude for a very long time. So Cicero started with describing gratitude as the mother of all virtues and crucial for social life. And Seneca added to this, saying that we have to focus on the feeling of gratitude. So he brought in this idea of the intention of the benefactor, and also the willingness, the gracefulness of the beneficiary. Obviously, Seneca was coming from a Stoic perspective, okay, and his agenda was very clear: to promote a just and fair society where all are equal. The idea of equality was very important to him, and so when he developed his concept of gratitude, his idea was, his attempt was to focus on the giver, the intention of the giver, and he said the actual benefit, the actual gift is this intention. No matter what the benefit is, the favor is, whether it's money, it's help, it's support, however big or small, what matters, if there's no benevolent intention there, then this is not gratitude. No one is owed gratitude if they don't intend to benefit someone else on purpose. And so this is what generates, according to Seneca, duties of gratitude. And he even spoke of duties to feel gratitude, because from a Stoic perspective, you have a duty to develop, to actually practice feeling in a certain way. So we can say you have a duty to feel grateful. From our more contemporary viewpoint, we are not very comfortable in saying, feelings can be owed or feelings can be duties. But from Seneca's Stoic point of view, this was something that he could actually demand. And so Seneca wrote the most influential treatise, actually, and for centuries after that, his treatise was the main point of reference whenever it came to the philosophy of gratitude. But what is interesting for me here is the differences between the Greek philosophers and the Roman philosophers and the way they treated gratitude, because it actually shows how the conceptualization of thankfulness reflects their social order and their concerns about their social order, what they want to promote. Aristotle, for example, wrote in a time of where Athenian democracy was flourishing, and so one of his main concerns was to leave out gift and gratitude, because he thought this might be an agent, or they might be agents of factors of corruption in the course of justice. So this is one. I'm sorry, I'm just going to close my window. So that was, for example, Aristotle's concern, whereas for Seneca and Cicero, as I said, and especially Seneca, he was concerned with promoting, he was writing, during the times of the Roman Empire flourishing. And so his concern was to promote a just and equal society. So Seneca's idea of gratitude was very influential. And so and this was picked up when the Roman Empire declined and Christianity was spreading in Europe. Christianity actually picked up this idea from Seneca about gratitude. And so now we get to the Middle Ages, where Christianity becomes the main medium of ideas, and especially, most importantly for me, the way we analyze our relationship to the world. And so uh, the inherited concept of gratitude that Seneca elaborated actually fit this triadic narrative of God, humans, and gifts. And so in this framework, there's God, who is the ultimate giver. He gives us everything. There's us humans, who are the receivers. So because we had, according to the religion, we have a special place in the world. We are the agents. God has given everything else. Everything else is a gift to us. So we are the receivers, God is the giver, and nature and animals are all gifts to us out of God's benevolence, for which we should be grateful. And so I want to mention Aquinas here, who developed this, the hierarchical relations of gratitude. And so it starts at the bottom, there's the family unit, and then the social relations, and then it goes up all the way to God, who is the ultimate benefactor. And so each hierarchical relation goes one level up, and so we owe gratitude to the person above us, and then the one above them, so on and so forth, until we get to God, who is actually to whom we should be thankful for everything, because he gave us everything. And I think this is quite a patriarchal framework, because it's the idea of the father, because it is hierarchical. Okay, now we've moved away from Seneca's idea of everyone being equals, and so there's a hierarchy now, where we can see the father at the head of the unit, this man who provides, and the receivers and the beneficiaries, who are expected to show gratitude. And so in Aquinas's conceptualization, ingratitude was a very serious sin, because it was a sign of not appreciating all the gifts that God and fathers and other figures of authority were giving to the beneficiaries. Now, so this really triadic sort of gratitude was even triadic concept of gratitude was elaborated in the Middle Ages, and then it actually was picked up and carried through the early modern times and the Enlightenment. So even though in the 17th century and starting then, we start to see that God is not at the center of philosophical thought anymore, and there is much on rationalism, sentimentalism. What matters to me here is to see that is to look at what changes in terms of conceptualizing gratitude. So on the one hand, there's more talk of emotions of gratefulness and gratitude as a regulator of interpersonal relationships. And so it is not just a duty to do something anymore, but it is important to see how we feel when we say we are grateful. Many philosophers wrote on gratitude, and so I only want to mention a few to see how the concept changes with the way philosophy is thinking about who humans are. But at the same time, it stays a triadic concept, because philosophy is still thinking in terms of interpersonal relationships when it comes to gratitude. And so, for example, Hobbes' gratitude was the law of nature. For Kant, gratitude was a sacred duty that can never be repaid, because your benefactor got there first, and no matter how much you give back, you can never make up for being there first, basically. For Spinoza, gratitude was only true between free individuals, so perfectly reasonable individuals. Whereas for Adam Smith later on, gratitude is a moral sentiment, very relevant to his theory of sympathy. And so what we can see here is that philosophers who promote rationalism and reason talk about gratitude as a duty, as an obligation. It is more focused on what we do, how this is expressed, and more sentimentalist philosophers are talking about gratitude as an emotion and how it feels to feel grateful, how it should feel to feel grateful, and why this is important in terms of regulating our interpersonal relationships. But again, like I said, what matters to me here is that this is all still in a very triadic view of gratitude, reflecting our place in the world. So we are still, in terms of gratitude, again, seen as being in this triangle. There's a giver, there's a receiver, and obviously there's a gift. And gratitude is generated in this triangle, okay? And Seneca's ideas of on the intention of the giver mattered very much throughout all those centuries. So whenever you find a treatise on gratitude, there is the idea that there has to be an intentional giver there, otherwise we're not speaking of gratitude. This is a very deeply ingrained idea in the philosophy of gratitude. And even though it's not about hierarchy anymore, we are still in a triadic relationship of beneficence. So what happened in the 20th century again changed the way we viewed ourselves as humans living in this world. And so, of course, the major social and economic upheavals in the 20th century and before, with the Industrial Revolution, the two world wars, the gradual decline of the importance of religion, secularization, all of these events changed our view of our place in the world. Okay, so we went, at least experientially, I argue, we went from a triadic view of our place in the world, where our relationship with the environment, with the animals, with other animals around us was mediated by religious principles. We went from that sort of understanding to a more dyadic view of our place. So now there's the human and there's the world that the human inhabits, and this is not a relationship that is necessarily mediated by God or any other religious figure, religious supernatural entity. And we also have to mention here the rise of the so-called spiritual movement, the New Age movement, which promoted this type of view of our place in the world, where we can relate to nature, to even experiences that are transcendental experiences, mystical experiences, without necessarily having to rely on religion to explain them to us, or to mediate our experiences, or to conceptualize our experiences for us. And so somehow, while these transformations and changes took place, the philosophy of gratitude, at least in the beginning, for the first half of the 20th century, kind of died out. You cannot find a lot on gratitude there. And it only got picked up again when positive psychology, psychologists started doing research on positive emotions. And so gratitude once again came back on the stage. And philosophers just picked up where it was left off, basically this triadic view of gratitude, where there's a giver, there's a receiver, and there's a gift. Now, of course, there's no problem with that view, and this is an important interpersonal experience. Okay, I'm not saying that there's no intentional benefactor. In fact, it is socially and morally important to think about this triadic form of gratitude. But the issue is that philosophers, especially in the last 20-25 years, tried to account for some forms of dyadic gratitude, dismissed these as just appreciation. So, and the problem was the absence of the intentional benefactor. So we always come back to this, that in the absence of the person who is giving us the benefit, we cannot speak of gratitude. And so, for example, Sean McAleer developed the idea of propositional gratitude, saying that perhaps we can be grateful that something is the case. And so I can be grateful that heroes exist. His example, I can be grateful that something is the case. Or other philosophers I'm sorry, such as Michael Lacewing, focused on the type of benefit. So he spoke of existential gratitude, being grateful for one important benefit, assuming existence is a benefit. And so, but these accounts are usually dismissed in contemporary thought in philosophy as being vague and as just accounts of appreciation or gladness. On the one hand, I agree with these criticisms, because I think saying that I'm grateful that heroes exist is actually a bit vague, and I don't see the difference between I'm grateful that heroes exist and I'm glad that heroes exist. But on the other hand, I think there is a very strong case to be made about a dyadic type of gratitude. And from my own experiences working with migrants, working with women who survived severe trauma, and seeing them rebuild their lives, and seeing that gratitude played a very big role in this ability to find themselves again, to redefine themselves in the world again. So gratitude does play a role in our relationship with the world. And I think there is a strong case to be made about dyadic gratitude. And so when I developed my own approach, which I called the concept of transpersonal gratitude, to deal with this criticism of the absence of an intentional benefactor. And so my take on this is that in a triadic view, yes, of course, this intentional benefactor is the target of gratitude. However, this doesn't mean that there cannot be any other types of gratitude. And in some cases, when the benefit is very significant, the benefit is at the center of the experience, then we have cases of gratitude that arise. And instead of saying, I'm grateful that heroes exist, which is really vague, we can say, I am grateful for my survival. And this is a genuine case of gratitude. And so this idea of transpersonal gratitude, I think, responds to the criticism, this main criticism of the absence of an intentional benefactor. And it also helps us to review our concept of gratitude. So as we saw, when Seneca developed the concept of gratitude, he had a certain agenda in mind, and then it really fit in with the Christian narrative of this triangle where God is the giver and we are the beneficiaries, and everything else is a gift. But there's no reason why we shouldn't rethink this, and in terms of how we see ourselves in the world now. And I think we are moving more and more towards a dyadic relationship with the world, and the philosophical discourse on gratitude should be able to account for this sort of relationship with the world. And so what are the implications of dyadic transpersonal gratitude, the ethical implications? So if we are reflecting critically on how we currently understand gratitude, I suggest that a strictly triadic view of gratitude is very reductive, and it doesn't conceptualize our current expressions and experiences of gratitude, and so it leaves out a very important part of our relationship with the world we inhabit. In my analysis of transpersonal gratitude, I also I have developed several phenomenological features of transpersonal gratitude, which I think have important ethical implications. And I'm going to focus here on the current environmental crisis, environmental collapse of our world. And so three important points here are connectedness, dependence, and humility. And so research into transpersonal gratitude, into its phenomenological features, tells us that there is a strong sense of connectedness with the world when this sort of gratitude is experienced, because one is placed in a situation of being benefited, somehow favored, without having done anything to actually create this situation. So I'm talking about things like surviving a very car crash, for example, or a plane crash, or at the other end of the spectrum is experiencing this moment of happiness, watching the starry sky, or a very beautiful sunset, and feeling that this is such a good thing to happen to me, and I'm grateful for it. And so this would be a very good example of transpersonal gratitude, which fosters feelings of connectedness, because it feels like I'm here, I have this really good thing happening to me. I don't know how it happened, but it happened. And so this benefit came to me, not from someone else, not from a specific source, but I am grateful for it, and it fosters feelings of being connected to others and the world around us. At the same time, it fosters feelings of dependence, because not in a weak or negative sense, but dependence, maybe interdependence, in terms of being able to rely that there's something good, that life can be good, that good things can happen, and that things, I can depend on certain things to happen. And finally, humility, because this is an experience that transcends this sort of very anthropocentric attitude that we have carried with us over the centuries. Humility, because it gives you a sense of being at the same time the receiver of something really good, but at the same time not having done anything for that. And so it's a realization of at the same time being very insignificant, but somehow favored. And so all these experiences lift us out of an ordinary sense of connection, and they foster an interconnectedness that I think is very, very beneficial when we think about our current environmental challenges. This is something that we should be teaching, perhaps, which is another project that I'm thinking about. Maybe this is something that can be taught, to say being grateful for what we have, being not necessarily coming from someone. So non-directed gratitude can really foster these feelings of connectedness and actually motivate us to take care of the world in this dyadic relationship where the environment supports us and we support it back, for example. So I will conclude here, and I'm happy to share my email if anyone else would like to continue the conversation. But so this is this genealogical perspective is my newest research into gratitude, and I really look forward to your comments and questions. The idea here is to see that our view of the way we view our place in the world is shifting, and so it's not between us and God and all the rest being considered gifts for us anymore. We are not the consumers of God's gifts anymore. We don't think of the world in this way. It doesn't mean that we cannot speak of gratitude in this dyadic form of relationship. I think there is gratitude there. There's dyadic gratitude, transpersonal gratitude, which actually fosters, promotes a sense of connectedness with the world at large. And this is why I think this dyadic gratitude needs to be incorporated into proper philosophical discourse. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Taline, for your talk. And I would like to introduce our next speaker, Ernesto Baltar from Madrid. University of not University. Sorry. Rey Juan Carlos University of Madrid. Am I right?
Yes.
Ernesto, yes.
That's right.
Okay. So you will have a talk about Iris Murdoch, says he, a bridge between analyticals and continentals. Iris Murdoch as a philosopher and essayist. I will introduce you a bit with a few words, if it's okay with you. So I can say that you studied philosophy and literary theory at the Complutense University of Madrid. And you wrote a PhD on Baltasar Gracian, which I find very interesting, and the Spanish Baroque thought. And you're now teacher, lecturer on history of contemporary philosophy and of the history of medieval philosophy, ethics, and social anthropology, which is a very broad range, I have to say. Then you also apart from that, are linked to this, you have also professional experience as an editor, translator, and publisher for a very long time. So, and among your translations is also Iris Murdoch's essays on existentialism and mystics. And so I guess this is why you also chose this topic, and somehow your professional activities are interrelated. So it's your turn now. I'm glad you are here, and we are excited to hear your talk.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you very much to the organizers of this symposium, to the International Association of Women Philosophers, and thank you also to the rest of participants and attendees. In this talk, I want to highlight the importance of Iris Murdoch as a philosopher and essayist, focusing on her condition as a bridge or connection between the British analytic philosophy and the continental European philosophy. Iris Murdoch is best known primarily for her work as a novelist, but she also developed an important career as a philosopher and essayist. She was a lecturer in philosophy at the University of Oxford for almost 2 decades, and she published numerous essays on ethics, aesthetics, and history of philosophy. From my point of view, the academic figure of Iris Murdoch as a scholar acquires a special relevance and significance due to her condition of bridge or connection between analyticals and continentals, as I say in the title. In this talk, I will focus especially on that, and I will expose and explain her reflections on the relationship between phenomenology, existentialism, and Marxism, in contrast to the analytic philosophy or the philosophy of language. Murdoch was educated in the environment of moralists, logicians, and language analysts based at the universities of Oxford and Cambridge. Wittgenstein, Ayer, Ryle, Hare, Moore, Stevenson, or Hampshire were her fundamental philosophical references, at least at the beginning. But the outbreak of the Second World War produced a very strong impact on her moral conscience and also on her biographical evolution, and changed the course of her philosophical career. After the war, nothing would be the same again. To express it in a very brief way, we can say that the humanitarian tragedy of the war revealed the theoretical insufficiency or limitations of the British philosophical tradition to address ethical issues, although Murdoch never denied its analytical preciseness and accuracy. While millions of human bodies were destroyed in the battlefield or returned skinny and malnourished from the concentration camps, one could no longer reduce ethics to the linguistic analysis of terms such as good, fair, moral, right, wrong, etc. In the face of the seriousness of the events, that kind of academic work was even deeply immoral. Moreover, Murdoch witnessed the situation firsthand, since between 1944 and 1946, she worked as an administrative officer in the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration in Belgium and Austria, an agency that provided food and blankets to refugees and survivors of the concentration camps. There, Murdoch contemplated the total failure of human society, as she put it, an experience that she would later describe as instructive. Among other things, this philosophical shift led her to the discovery of existentialism, an intellectual movement that she could later contrast politically with the movements of Marxism, liberalism, and socialism in the British Islands. Despite the criticisms that she made regarding existentialism, Murdoch was a pioneer in the divulgation or dissemination of this current of thought in the Anglo-Saxon world. In fact, in 1953, Murdoch released her first work, Sartre, Romantic Rationalist, one of the first monographs published in any language on the French philosopher. In a way, her interest in existentialism would not cease to be present throughout her career, given that her last work in progress, which would remain unfinished at her death, consisted of a long-term study on Heidegger's philosophy. Let's begin with this idea of Murdoch as a bridge between analytic philosophy and existentialism. Regarding the influence of analytic philosophy, the issues that Murdoch raises in her essays are those characteristic of her historical moment and her academic environment. For example, the following questions: what light does linguistic analysis shed on the legitimacy and verifiability of ethical propositions? How are these propositions translated into the practice of personal and social behavior? Is there a way to fruitfully combine the absolutism of Platonic forms or Kantian imperatives with the discoveries of modern psychology and scientific rationalism? How can logical positivism contribute to the fundamental currents of contemporary metaphysical and ethical debate, etc.? On the other hand, her interest in Sartre and existentialism was a clear symptom of her deep dissatisfaction with the analytic philosophy in which she had been educated, because this philosophy had abandoned reflection on such important issues as, for example, conscience and moral values, among many others. At the end, Sartre's existentialism would not offer a clear answer to the ethical problems that it promised to solve, so that Murdoch would also be very critical of his philosophy. His supposed commitment to the world seemed spurious for her, and his dogmatic models of conscience were mere abstractions that reduced the variety and complexity of reality. In this way, Murdoch explicitly denounced that existentialism contained a dramatic, solipsistic, romantic, and antisocial exaltation of the individual, and also that its denial of the mystery ruined its claim to obtain true representations of the situation of the human being. For Iris Murdoch, Sartre understood life as an egocentric drama in which the world has the shape that each one provides according to his or her values, to his or her projects and weaknesses. According to her biographer, Peter Conradi, the most important biographer of Iris Murdoch, the two words in the title of her study on Sartre, Romantic Rationalist, had at least a skeptical meaning, if not downright pejorative. Later, when existentialism was out of fashion, structuralism and post-structuralism emerged as her main adversary. And Murdoch would address this opposition in his book, Metaphysics as a Guide to Morals. We can say, following George Steiner, we can synthesize the main philosophical influences of Iris Murdoch's philosophy around 5 large groups, let's say. First, the ancient and modern classics, among which Plato and Kant stand out, without forgetting Aristotle and Hume. Second, the Oxbridge group, especially G.E. Moore and his transcendental empiricism, but also, as I have said before, Ryle, Hare, Hamza, Ayer, Charles Stevenson, which are mentioned frequently in her early writings. Third, the continental existentialism, especially Jean-Paul Sartre, as I have mentioned. Fourth, 2 masters of suspicion like Marx and Freud, who are often intuited in the background of her essays. And finally, mystical thinkers such as Pascal, Kierkegaard, and Simone Weil. All of them would leave a deep mark on the work of Iris Murdoch, sometimes as a permanent influence, sometimes as occasional traveling companions, sometimes as a controversial reference to her thought. Let's see now how is the relationship among phenomenology, existentialism, and logical positivism according to Iris Murdoch. First of all, Murdoch affirms that with Hegel, the real subject enters philosophy. Certainly, Hegel said that everything is finally reconciled in the absolute. But what interested him, at least in his phenomenology of the spirit, was not the end, but the way. There, Hegel provided a series of portraits of a self that is in various phases self-alienation and self-knowledge. At first, it's perceived simply as something confronting itself, then as something that is in conflict with other subjects, dominating them or being dominated by them. Later, the self progresses to produce an ethical and even religious meaning of the world. It's, in many respects, as Murdoch points out, the same self whose adventures we find again in Sartre's Being and Nothingness, albeit with some important differences. Behind the history of the Hegelian self is dialectics, the self-development of reason, or in any case, the progressive and intelligible march of the world, as Marxists would formulate it. The Hegelian self does not have a structure or a fundamental dilemma, because ultimately it's not an independent and irreducible entity. And the only thing that remains in the end are the different phases of the absolute. The self whose structure Sartre describes in Being and Nothingness, and whose adventures he also recounts in his novels, is nevertheless an independent entity, and faces, like Kierkegaard's self, a fundamental dilemma. For Murdoch, the didactic purpose of Sartre's novels and plays is that we are aware of this dilemma, so that we can launch ourselves into the human task of understanding our world and giving it a meaning. Murdoch links existentialists and logical positivists in their reflections on facts and values, since he considers that through different paths, they have reached similar positions. By emphasizing that real value depends on a free act of valuation and not on an objective quality of the world, the existentialists approached a way of thinking that Wittgenstein had already expressed previously in the Tractatus, when he says that in the world, everything is as it is and everything happens as it happens. There is no value in it, and if there were, it could be worthless. So from there, their conclusions are different. The logical positivist defends that moral statements are ultimately related to our attitudes towards life, and that they are not simple statements of facts. While Sartre wants to go to the root of the problem and also scrutinize deeply into ethics. His novels describe the drama of people who react to the dilemma of their ethical loneliness and their situation of conflict with other subjects. In the Noisia, meaning is seen as something far removed, not only from a world of objective values, but from physical objects themselves. It's a deepening into the absurd. The same disappearance of meaning applied on this occasion to social convention is described in The Stranger by Albert Camus. Ultimately, for Murdoch, the phenomenological novels of existentialism focus on the rupture of subjects with the beliefs, images of the world, politics, religion, love, and hatred that surround them. So it's this what gives a disturbing character to the writings of Simone de Beauvoir, Camus, and Sartre, since the interest is centered in the ambiguity of the situation of the characters and in how they decide to resolve it. That's exactly what Merleau-Ponty was trying to express when he said that with Simone de Beauvoir, the era of moral literature had ended, and the era of metaphysical literature had begun. Finally, let's approach this question. According to Iris Murdoch, is there a family resemblance between existentialism and Marxism? When Murdoch analyzes the novels of Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, she makes some comparisons of similarity and contrast between existentialism and Marxism that are quite illustrative. To begin with, she says that the existentialist shares with the Marxist a feeling of responsibility for the condition of human being, a conception of life that as a perpetual war, and a willingness to engage in battle with his weapons of thought. That's why literature must also be in the fight. It must commit itself. The fact that in Sartre's novels, the emphasis is placed on politics as the most important expression of ethics is a symptom that the existentialist has acquired a deeply Marxist point of view. Therefore, Sartre is not only a Hegelian in his philosophical technique, says Murdoch, but also a Marxist in his immediate reactions to the world. At the end of the essay, Existentialism is a Humanism, there is an interesting discussion between Sartre and a Marxist, as Murdoch recalls. While the Marxist launches himself directly into praxis, into action, the existentialist prefers to concentrate on reflection. In this way, the Marxist would argue that in reality, the existentialist plays the reactionary's game, since constant reflection hinders action. And the existentialist would reply that the Marxist obtains the action at the cost of destroying the capacity of reflection and of losing sight of the purposes, of the ends or goals. So according to Murdoch, the Hegelian characteristic that all of them have in common, Marxists, existentialists, and language analysts, is, she says, a non-dualistic patience with phenomena. What we are working on is the world lived, experienced, considered as the real in itself and endowed with its own criteria of truth, With this attention to phenomena, the rigid opposition between idealism and materialism is overcome. Furthermore, a sense of unity between theory and practice is reached, and a determination not to say more that we can see. So giving up the old speculative metaphysics of the Cartesians. So as a way of conclusion, we can ask what would be the main differences among the three streams that Murdoch studies and analyzes. As Murdoch summarizes, we have first that logical analysts describe ordinary language, and they also describe behavior insofar as the language expresses the behavior. Second, existentialists describe a type of psychological phenomena related to private personal experience. And third, the Marxists describe the behavior of man as a social being. Also, the purposes for which the descriptions are used are different for Murdoch. However, the method they use has common features, and even existentialism shares some conclusions with logical analysis and other conclusions with Marxism. So as Murdoch describes in a very vigorous way, regarding method, we are all Hegelians today, but the specter behind is Kant. Finally, Iris Murdoch analyzes the importance of existentialism as a political myth, for which she continues to investigate the relationship of this current with Marxism. As the first common substratum, Murdoch points out that both currents live in an age of anti-essentialist, anti-Cartesian, anti-abstract dialectical thought, where the fruits of Hegel are gathered and the question of the break with Kant is faced. Sartre tries to expose the general structure of human consciousness and points out the absurdity of its loneliness. He concentrates his attention on the individual consciousness and his immediate mental behavior. And what emerges is an ahistorical, asocial, and indeterminate individual. So that is to say, a solipsistic image. From this point of view, Murdoch compares Sartre's method with that of the logical analysts, who also observe the character of consciousness from moment to moment to define the concepts that are used when speaking of the mind. In Existentialism is a Humanism, Sartre will speak of freedom in much more universalist and Kantian terms. The idea is that I cannot choose something as good for myself unless it seems good for all human. I can't wish for my own freedom without wishing it for everyone. Although this implies contradicting his previous position, Sartre needs to refer finally to a universal human nature. So, in conclusion, Murdoch perceives existentialism as a mythological representation of the political dilemma of the 20th century. Ultimately, the dilemma consists of deciding what the rejection of Marxism means for the intellectuals who consider morally unacceptable the existence, for example, of forced labor camps, the insecurity of the individual, and the absence of freedom of thought in the Soviet Union. Of course, says Murdoch, the answer cannot lie in existentialism, basically because it does not give any answer. It only provides the problematic, the question mark. But it does express in a passionate way the desire to travel middle way, in order to preserve the values of an innocent and vital individualism in a world that seems to threaten them. A middle way between the two prevailing models of life in that time, capitalism and communism. Remember that Mother is saying this in the 1950s, in the midst of the Cold War, and she seems to be calling for a kind of third way, some decades before the British sociologist Anthony Giddens. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ernesto, for your talk.